Hello and welcome to Creativity Uncovered. My name is Abby Gatling and I'm on a journey to uncover how everyday people find inspiration, get inventive, and open their imagination. Basically, I want to find out how people come up with creative solutions and then how they use them at home, work, play, and everything in between. And my goal for this podcast is that by the end of it, you'll be armed with a whole suite of tried and tested ways to summon creativity the next time that you need it. Now, my guest today is someone who has made such an epic pivot in their career, moving from being a political lobbyist to becoming a hugely successful fantasy writer. So today I'd like you to join me in welcoming all the way from the US, JV Hilliard. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
So now, JV, you have one of the coolest kind of career journeys that I have heard, because now you seem to be like living the creative dream. And what I really love about your story is kind of that it's almost like a tale of yin and yang. From being a lobbyist to being a fantasy writer, I can imagine that your life is hugely, hugely different now. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. It's like left brain, right brain. And, as you mentioned, I was a DC lobbyist for about 20 years. I focused primarily on defense lobbying and technology lobbying. So during that time, I was working on really what I would describe as very real things, providing for the common defense and promoting the general welfare and all the kind of stuff that you hear, and dealing with, in particular, the Pentagon and the legislature and the White House, for real everyday stuff. And then, the gate swings open with COVID and DC shut down for almost 18 months. And so it was an opportunity. The silver lining in the COVID experience for me was we were all stuck at home, and I had always wanted to write a book. And this was a way for me to kick something off of my bucket list. And then it, like you described, it became a career, right? It's something now that, I've pivoted to in my everyday life. And for me, I don't want to look back. This is just so much fun. It's stress-free in many respects. And I enjoy doing shows like this, conventions, book signings. I even go to book clubs and talk to people at libraries. It's a great time, and it's all about make-believe, and it's the opposite of the realism. It's now escapism and entertainment. And for me, it's just been a lot of fun transitioning into this, and I'm glad it's become successful because, it takes a while for authors to get that way so that you can be self-sustaining. And, I'm fortunate in the sense that I've had a pretty successful career, and I'm able to bridge some of that to the point where my books are becoming as relevant as they are within the space. So, I'm happy, I'm fortunate, and I don't want to look back.
That's so cool. And that's so great that you sort of touched on it, that it is hard. It is hard for authors to make it. Like, you've got to have a certain amount of commerciality, I suppose, to be able to break into the wider audience sphere. How did you do that? Because from not having written anything to writing a book and then it being so successful, being made into, do you say 3 or 4 book series? How did that happen?
Well, in part, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I've owned several businesses in the past, some of them much more successful than others.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, for me, I looked at my writing and my readership as an entrepreneurial endeavor. And what I mean by that is I know many authors look at it from the art side. And this is my art, and I'm going to put it out in the ether, and hopefully people like it. And if they don't, that's fine. It's something that I want to do, and I needed to get it out of me and share it with people. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I respect that to some degree, where that's exactly what this is all about, right? It's sharing a good story that entertains somebody.
Mm.
My part, the other part of my brain that's more strategic, looked at it and said, well, look, if you're going to do this, commit to doing a series, commit to getting to that third or fourth book where you can start making money at this, build a following, market it as best you can. And so therefore I've treated it like any of my other entrepreneurial endeavors, just like a business. So I'm out there marketing myself. I'm doing shows like this. I'm doing, like tomorrow I'm going to be in Raleigh, North Carolina for GalaxyCon, which is a big convention. My third book is launched tomorrow. So, and I've got a couple of speaking engagements at the convention. And, they have about 30,000 people come to those. But conversely, if you rewind to this past Sunday, I was at a local bookshop and I had 3 people, right? And it's just, it's a contact sport. Like you literally have to be in contact with people to sell stuff. And so even though I had an hour slot at a used bookstore and I sold 3 books, I still went, right? And I did my social media around it. And I did preliminary stuff around it. And I, sent out, invitations to my newsletter folks that I knew that were in the area. And, but it was a nice summer day here. And, you're just on a Sunday coming out to, if this was like November maybe here and it was a wintry, then I'll go to the bookstore and see the guy. But everybody was out at the park doing whatever, enjoying their summertime. And it just wasn't the right fit. But tomorrow's different. I go into a weekend where I'm going to be running into 30,000 people, and it's just that general contact. And I think authors too have a tendency to be introverted. And if you can't tell in the first 5 minutes of this interview, I'm anything but introverted. So for me, I'll stop people that aren't even looking at my table and I'll ask them questions. I'll try to get them engaged. And it's the salesmanship of that, I think, that I kind of bring to this, which also helps to advance the sales of the books. But to your point, you have to go. I mean, the product has to be good, right? So people have to like the story, and so it was a matter of writing a strong story and coupling that with the right kind of marketing effort and, finding the right publishing folks that are working with me and the marketing folks that are working with me to make it all worthwhile.
Yeah, wow. So, well, I mean, congrats on the third book. That's exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's an interesting approach to it because, some people lead with their creativity and other people lead with saying, if I'm going to be creative, it's got to be purposeful. And, the way you've sort of approached it, be like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it really well. So I don't have to go back to being a lobbyist, basically.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I mean, the lobbyist stuff it's a tough business. It's you have to have a thick skin. People don't like you. It's zero-sum game. It's us versus them all the time. And I'll give you one example of so during my former day job, if I were to be on a show like this, I would have prepped for it for 2 days. Literally, I would have known everything about my opponent. They would have known everything about me. The host of the show would have come at me with some sort of counterpoint or some gotcha moment, trying to get me to say something that I shouldn't say on the air. When I did my first interview like this, it was on a podcast, and the host asked me the question, so what season of the year do you like writing in the most? And it was at that point the light bulb went on, and it was like, wait a minute, are you trying to help me? Like, what's going on here? I wasn't used to it. I was waiting for the gotcha moment, and it never came. And he was like, no, I want to try to advance what you're doing here. I want this, this is great. And so when that hit, you just the momentum started, and I was like, wait a minute. This is fun and entertaining and zero pressure, and this is just going to be great. So, and at that point, about a third of the way through COVID, I was like, all right, well, let's go. If I'm in, I'm all the way in, and that's what I did. And so it's been a lot of fun. The ride's been great, and you're right, I don't want to go back.
Oh, I mean, that's so cool. I love that sort of juxtaposition of, your previous interviews and time now when you're in the creative space. I really think creativity is such a connector, and it can be such a positive thing. I've certainly experienced that through even just this podcast. You get someone on to talk about creativity, their whole face lights up, and you can't get them to stop talking about it. So,
Oops, sorry, I'll limit my responses. I'm used to that anyway, so okay.
No, this isn't a gotcha moment. Don't you worry. So let's take a little step back because the type of writing that you do is epic, dark fantasy, right? What I mean, I'm not hugely familiar in that space. Tell me what is that?
Sure. So, like many literature genres, there's plenty that fit into fantasy adventure. And the standard fantasy adventure thing is kind of like Conan the Barbarian. That in my world would be called sword and sorcery, right?
Hmm.
Epic fantasy is much more like Lord of the Rings. And what that is, it's typically longer novels with a series behind them. And then behind that, you've got an entire world built out. It's just not a one shot where you're coming in and I'm going to learn about this story and then it ends. You've got a political system, and on top of that political system, you have an economic system, and then you've got a history of the realm. So if you look at what Lord of the Rings had done, and you put yourself in the shoes of either Frodo or Bilbo, the story of what had happened was really 1,000 years before with Sauron, right? And Galadriel and all the stuff that, like the prequel stuff, was already there. And so, that's the kind of thing that we write. We write things that have a history, and we write things that have a future, and you're living in a snapshot of that period. And typically there's something epic about it, right? So you either have, massive amounts of struggle between political machinery, or, in the case of Lord of the Rings, you have the return of this ultimate evil. And the dark stuff comes in. It's more, my writing style is more like Lord of the Rings meets Dracula, right? Like
Mm.
I incorporate the gothic into it. My monsters are all unique. I don't, even though I borrow inspiration from some, like, what I would describe as standard myths of, like, the Nordic, traditions, or Native American tradition, or some Asian traditions. For the most part, they're recognizable, but I've got this skin around them that makes them unique in my world. But people can identify with them as part of that. And so you see the scary side of this. And so it's a mix between what I would describe as Tolkien and that gothic, in the hopes of bringing some of that horror into my epic fantasy. And so maybe it's closer to Lord of the Rings than it, or excuse me, more closer to, like, to Game of Thrones than it is Lord of the Rings. But epic, fantasy is you can cut both ways on that one.
Yeah, wow. I love that there are genres and then subgenres and subgenres, and you can get more and more niche, and there's an
You wouldn't
audience
know
for
it.
that.
You wouldn't know it. Like, I didn't know there was a difference between a young adult reader and a new reader, and a new reader to an adult reader. Like, a YA is someone 13 to 17. A new reader is someone that's 17 to 20, and
Um,
then you've got adult readings at 21 and up. And so you're targeting, it's even age, it's crazy, but it's true. And so folks, target a niche that they want to write to. And this was one that I've always wanted to write to.
so has it been a real learning journey for you to find out about these genres and the age groups and all that sort of stuff? Has that been a learning journey for you as well?
It has, one of the reasons that I chose to go the traditional publishing route was because, as a business person, there's an old saying in betting, which is, if you don't know the horse, you don't make the bet. And I didn't know the publishing market at all. And for me to step into a marketplace and try to start a new business, in my head, think of that. That's what I was trying to do here. Was this? I saw this as a business, with me being the brand and my books being the product. I knew if I was coming into this market, I needed someone next to me that knew what they were doing. And so I didn't want to be an indie author. I wanted to be traditionally published. So I had even though that meant I was taking less royalties, but I had a partner that knew what she was doing. And in this case, Dragon Moon Press became that for me. And I learned more about the industry, which has allowed me to then make the right kind of business decisions on where I go and what I do and how I promote. And typically it's alongside of her. Now, some things, I might want to do that she doesn't want to do, and that's okay too. And then that comes out of my own pocket. But then I get all the victor goes the spoils, or I lose my money, right? Depending on what dice I'm rolling that day. But it has been a tremendous learning experience, and it's drinking from a fire hose, really. This industry is one that's been around for ages, and some of them are, these traditional publishing houses are steeped in their traditions, and it's really hard to break them from that. And I just have one that is a little bit more agile, and what I would describe as a niche publishing house that focuses on my genre, that understands my marketplace really well. And, I fell into it. And same thing with my editors. I got the right editors to be part of this, that understand the genre, know what my readers expect. My beta readers know what my readers expect, because they read my stuff all the time. And so, writing is really a team sport. It's just not me sitting in a coffee shop somewhere writing. It's really a group of people that are helping me hone my product to make it the best it can be, to the benefit of not only the reader, but also to the business side of things.
Yeah, I love that is that writing is a team sport. And it's true though. I think like with any endeavor, you can focus on the things that you're good at and outsource to people who know more than you. That's certainly how my business works. I work with people who are busy every day focusing on their professional services. Leave the marketing to me. I'm doing this day in, day out. So I mean, I guess that makes sense in writing as well.
Oh, well said. In my previous business, it was the same way. People hired me because they didn't know how to navigate the government marketplace. And the same thing would hold true if you're not going to walk into court without a lawyer, or you're not going in front of, in the US, the Internal Revenue Service, without an accountant, right? So you just find someone that knows what they're doing. In this case, I needed a publishing team, an editorial team, and a team of folks that really had a domain expertise that was around fantasy adventure, sci-fi, dystopian stuff that you read, like Hunger Games, and because a lot of that stuff is translatable. Like if you're a fan of Star Wars, you're likely also a fan of Lord of the Rings, or same thing holds. There's just a number that you're just open-minded to that type of thing, and you might not be a romance reader, or the romance reader is. So I'm not going to go to a romance publisher and ask them to help me publish my fantasy book. So I found someone that was in my very narrow lane, and
Yeah.
she helped me to grow it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, unless you want to go further down the Game of Thrones route, but a bit more sexy times. Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, it's interesting to me that you sort of have started with a passion for writing and fantasy, but then really quickly focused on the business side of things. Which I think is a really smart move because, you obviously have an end goal in mind and you want to get there as quick as possible. But how do you switch back between that business side and the creative side and getting back into the writing?
Yeah, I think that someone like me, I used the term left brain, right brain before. I am to some degree mentally ambidextrous when it comes to that. I really enjoy the writing, the creativity side. And in part that comes from, 20 years of playing Dungeons and Dragons and being a creative. I was a dungeon master for many of our groups, campaigns as part of that playtime. And, we still haven't stopped. The same group that I played with in high school and in college, we still get together on Sunday nights, 6 to 10, regardless of our wives or husbands. We put that stuff aside and still play, and that fuels the creative side. And for a while, it's sated that for me. I didn't need that because I was getting that as an outlet. And then COVID happened, and that really provided me with the opportunity to say, all right, well, now I've got my days free. It's just not Sunday 6 to 10. How do I take this creative side and put it on steroids and really kind of rev it up and throw some rocket fuel on it, right? And that's what I did. And then once you have that product and you think you have a good book, you have to market it. Because if you look at Amazon, for example, Amazon has tens of thousands of new books each month, and if you're not out there marketing like everybody else is, you're just going to get lost in the tsunami of new work that's coming out. You have to differentiate yourself, and part of that is the sweat equity, right? That's the elbow grease that you put into it. And so it's doing these calls at crazy hours at night, and or getting on the road and or going to a used bookstore and only selling 3 books. Each book means that you got a new reader and you're capturing something, a new email address that you can reach out to for the next one. And you just have to build your base like you would any kind of startup business. And so, maybe it's because that was easy for me to fall back on. I understood those protocols and rubrics and all that kind of stuff as a business owner. But the creative side was like, wait a minute, this is so much fun. This isn't me marketing my services in DC. This is really me marketing me and this cool story that I wrote. And I think that's been a lot of fun for me, and an experience I wouldn't trade in. I mean, it's been great.
Yeah. I think that's it. Like if you do something and you're proud of your work, you want to get it out there. It makes perfect sense to me that you're doing that. But then again, I am a marketer, so it's definitely playing into
See,
my
see,
sense of
there it
understanding.
is. Uh-huh.
No,
You
but
get it. Hey, do you need
yeah.
a client? I'm looking for a marketer. I need to beef up my Australian market a little bit.
Oh, we'll talk after. We'll talk after. I think that's interesting that you mentioned Dungeons and Dragons. Again, it's not something I'm hugely familiar with, but from what I understand, that a huge part of it is storytelling and creating a whole new world. It seems now you've said that, it kind of really makes sense that you've kind of gone down this track now because you've been doing it since high school, you said.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, for me, you're right about Dungeons and Dragons. For those that have never been engaged in role-playing games or, cosplay games or live action role plays, those are groups of people that are suffering from group delusions, right? Like, so I, as the dungeon master, just imagine yourself sitting around a campfire and I'm telling you a horror story. Like it's a verbal communication of a story, and sometimes it's with body language, sometimes it's with tone. Those same kind of things are baked into your writing, right? When you sit down, you open my first book and you flip to the prologue and you start reading it, there's a tone in there that's set as part of that. And I think a lot of that comes from my experience as a dungeon master and or a player in the game, where I'm sitting there creating a story, and for the next 3 or 4 or 5 hours, you're playing along with it, right? And it becomes like real life past experience. I mean, it's a funny story. I mean, I joke around with my wife about it. Like we'll be at a Christmas party with our friends, and all the D&D folks are sitting in a corner talking about stuff that never really happened in real life, but how great it was, and laughing at stories, and everybody else is standing there saying, what are you guys what's going on? Like, but it's a story that you all lived, and so it's kind of been game tested, and so taking the best of the game stuff that we did and putting it into a story, smoothing it out, it's easy for it to be liked, I think, because it's already been battle tested. People have been through it, and you've seen what people have liked and you saw what they didn't like. So you throw out the bad stuff and you keep the good stuff, including characters that you've made, plots that you've had, villains that you've created, monsters that just came out of nowhere. And you get these arch villains and you're like, oh, this would make a really, really good story. And so that's really where it came from.
Yeah, stories and shared experiences are such great connectors, and it seems like your books have really hit a chord with people. Would you say there's a crossover between people who play D&D and people who read your books?
Oh, without a doubt. That's the first thing I hear when I'm around the public, whether I'm giving a speech somewhere or I'm selling, books and stuff like that. Those that have read it can say that when I'm reading your battle scenes, I feel like I'm playing the game. Or
Wow.
there's definitely a role-playing aspect. I can tell. I was going to guess that you play D&D because I feel it when I read your stuff, and or the characters that are part of it too. So there are some traditional tropes you can get away with, like elves, like Tolkien used elves, D&D uses elves. So they're kind of ubiquitous. So I'm allowed to use my own kind of elf. I'm just not I can't use the term Middle Earth or, Faerun or Forgotten Realms because they belong to someone else. So mine is the realm of Warminster, and I just introduce these twists on, tropish kind of characters that make sense, and you take them through a hero's journey, or you take them through another kind of a plot that you want to, and it is, and I've been able to use that and mix those things together in a way where I think my readership, especially those that have played role-playing games, and I'm not talking about just role-playing games like D&D. I'm talking about, you could be playing a video game these days. There are all sorts of video RPGs out there, or there's an entire genre of lit RPG, literature RPGs, where they're writing stories about how they've played a game on a video game,
Oh.
and it's crazy but I'm telling you, it's just a lot of fun, and I'm glad people do that. I had someone come up to me at the last convention I was at and said, "Your books are like D&D on crack." And I was like, "That's pretty cool, I think."
Wow. Yeah.
So
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. But I'll tell you, it's the most flattering stuff when people when they come up and say that to you, or they bring you some fan art, or they send you something in an email that kind of, it really, like, something that touched them or motivated them, and you're looking at this portrait that they've drawn that looks exactly like the character you described, and said, "Man, like, we've never met. You read my stuff and you came up with that." And that's like a police sketch artist of exactly what that character looks like, and you feel you're humbled by it in that sense, and it energizes me to write more and more stuff, because I know that I'm having the effect of entertaining people. Some entertained so much that they're taking time out of their schedules to do that for me, and to seek me out at a convention or a book signing. And I don't know how you couldn't be humbled if someone did that. I mean, and that kind of gives me the energy to do the next and the next and the next.
Yeah, wow, that is a very cool experience. I actually was watching a webinar the other day, and it was talking about video trends and things like that. And it was an interesting part in it where they talked about the levels of fandom and, the different levels of engagement. And when people start taking your work and inserting a little bit of themselves into it through creating fan art, writing their own, mini stories based on it, extrapolating on a character, that's a really high level of fandom. It's such an achievement that people are doing that based on your books. That's super humbling, I can imagine.
Yeah, I try to put as much of that online as I can. I use it in my social media. People can find their fan art on my website. I try to honor that, because it does. It makes you feel good that you affected someone with your story so much that they went out of their way to create something else off of it. I've even had people ask me if they can write, fan fiction on it, and I keep telling them, like, you can't. Let me finish the first series before you start on fan fiction. It just doesn't work that way. You don't know how it's going to end, so how are you going to write fan fiction on it? But it's really kind of humble. Or when someone comes up and says, "Please don't kill this character," or "This is my favorite character," and you're just stunned that they've taken a minor character that I've used as comic relief, or like one of the bad guys' henchmen, and they love him, and they're excited about it. And and for me, like I said, I try to honor that. And people, I even had one guy at the last convention I was at make a baseball card of me. He has, like, literally, I've seen collectors of cards, and they keep them in their big folios and plastic, and if he likes a book, he takes the author's official photo, turns it into a baseball card, and then he brings it for you to sign, and then he sticks it in his book, and he keeps it. Like, he
Wow.
collects photo. You want to talk about humbling? I was like, "Oh, that's a really cool idea," having no idea that he was coming up for me to sign one. I thought he was just showing me, "Hey, look what I've got." And he's like, "No, no, can you sign this?" And you're
Wow.
just like, "Holy cow!" And it's just so much fun. And that's what I mean. It's like that entertainment piece. You can't beat that. You're so glad when you can entertain somebody.
That's cool. While you're saying this, I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, this is so many miles away from DC, isn't it?
Yeah, just crazy. Like, that would never happen in everybody in DC would talk about your behind your back,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
here it's like, and they're looking for weaknesses. Where here it's like, "How can I help you?" Or, "I want you to come on my show and promote you," or, can I get you to sign this for my son or daughter?" It's like,
Yeah.
it's just miles away from it, like you said.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You've switched voodoo dolls for baseball cards.
Well
Oh,
said.
that's
I'm going to use that and not give you credit down the road, by the way. I'm just saying, clearly 100% from me.
yes. We record a box pop later, so you can say it again. But yeah. So tell me, you mentioned games before. Your book is actually being made into a game of some sort. Is that right?
That's right. I licensed the intellectual property of my first four novels to an augmented reality, virtual reality video game company called Melderverse.
Huh.
And in late 2024, the augmented reality game will come out. And in late 2025, the VR version of it will come out. And for those of you who have played Pokemon Go on your phones, you know what AR is, right? So instead of catching a Pokemon, you're going to be able to use your phone to capture rewards in a game where you're creating your own avatar and slaying the dragon, but there's going to be real life rewards as well as, leveling up rewards in the game. So your character will level up and gain experience and hit points and powers and all that kind of stuff. But as part of the dragon's treasure or whatever it might be, you're also going to be able to earn real world points, which is, a buy one, get one at Starbucks, or a buy one, get one at your local deli, or whatever it might be, whoever's sponsoring those things in there. And so they've partnered with the company that owns Pokemon Go, called Niantic, to kind of create the skeleton of this. And then Melderverse is coming in and wrapping around, putting the meat on the bone. And my storyboarding is helping them kind of, navigate the plot lines and things like that, staying, within the confines of the realm, but understanding that they're obviously going to have to make it different because, the representations of the characters are going to be different. They're going to be live as opposed to in your imagination and things like that too. And, sometime in 2024, I might also have a graphic novel series that's beginning. We're in the early stages of that adaptation. So we'll see where that goes too. But I get that a lot, is like, oh, your book should be a comic. They're so rich, they're so graphic that you need to turn this into a comic book. And, lo and behold, I'm halfway down that road. So not there yet. I don't have a publisher for it, but I've got a team that I'm putting around for it. And it's excited about getting that done.
Wow, I can't believe all the different avenues you can go down with this and how you can translate your book into so many different formats. It's unbelievable. It's just a whole new world I've never even thought about.
Yeah, the question you get a lot is, is it ever going to be made a movie, or is it going to be a Netflix series, or whatever it might be? And that's what you hear a lot. You never hear, is your book going to be turned into a video game? Or am I going to see this in my local comic book store? And you just take the opportunities as they come to you, and if that helps it one day to to sell more. And again, I'm honored that someone would see my books as a strong enough to support a video game audience, and that the kind of battles and challenges in the novel that they read translate well into the same kind of thing for gamers. And it makes sense when you think about it. So yeah, of course I'm going to take advantage of that if I can, and then my art finds another medium, in this case maybe two. So we'll see where that goes down the road, but I'm excited just to be part of it, and I'm honored that someone would think my stuff's worthy of that.
Yeah, I think like your writing is so rich, the vocabulary is so interesting. It must be very typical of fantasy writing, but surely translating into other mediums, that's kind of a hard process to make sure that you're still capturing the essence of it all when you're stripping out like 90% of the words.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like, you're going from a very imaginative playground to one that is visual, whether it is in a comic book, like you said, where you're taking what might be an entire chapter, and putting it into a couple of pages, all graphically done. And it's that illustration that carries the story as opposed to the words. And, you mentioned way in the beginning of this interview that, when you don't know what you do, you find someone that does, and you bring them on as part of your team, you sub that out. Well, that's exactly what's going on here. I couldn't ever put together a graphic novel. I wouldn't even know where to begin for that, but I've got people that can, and, they're going to partner on this to make that happen. Or the same thing with the video game. I'm not a technologist. I can't do augmented reality, but they know their realm. And so I'll be there to assist, but I'm also self-aware enough to know when I need to get out of my own way. Like, I'm not going to tell them how to make their own game or make their own graphic novel. They know their industry. I don't. So I'll stay here and just call me when you need me. And as long as it's not outside of reason that you want to change some things, I'm usually pretty easygoing when it comes to that, and realizing you're just adapting it, and it's not the same, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be something that's, again, entertaining. Someone, wanted to see it, and, oh, this is what Ritter looks like, or this is what Adeline looks like, or at least from my eyes, what they should look like. And then they, and that helps to inform the reader.
Yeah, I can only imagine that you're describing you're describing your characters and the environment in all this way, and then when someone else comes up with an interpretation of it, a visual interpretation, it could be jarring, or it could enhance what you already had in your brain. Like I know when I've read books and then I've watched the movie, the first part you're like, oh, that's not what they look like, but then you really quickly adapt to it and you're like, yeah, of course that's what they look like.
Yeah, right. And look, you don't ever want me drawing anything. It's bad. It's like stick figure bad. So for me, I appreciate their art form, and I think they appreciate mine. And so if I can help them, like, and it's basically like an interview. They sit down and say, well, tell me about this character, and what does he or she look like? And, and you give them the parameters of it, and they come back with like profiles and costumes and what their weapons look like, and what they may look like in different stages of their life. And I didn't even know that was a thing. And meanwhile, there's like 5 pages of iterations of what these characters will look like during the course of the story. And you're like, oh, that's pretty good. I never thought of it that way.
Wow.
Because in your head, like, your characters don't age, or there's just something about them that they're always going to be the same person. And really, in the end, they've already taken that into account in this new form. And you're like, wow, that's really good. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Wow.
And you just have to respect their talent and get out of their way. Like, I don't have the ego to stand there and wave my finger at them and say, that's not what I wanted. No. Yeah, if you're close, you're good.
Yeah. And do you think what they're coming up with is shaping how you're going to progress with your next books?
Oh, sure. It gives you thought. Like, by way of example, when I did the first storyboard for the video game, you realize the limitations of it. Like, in the book, there are no limits. I'm creating this sweeping realm, and it's just me writing it, and it doesn't really happen anywhere. It's all happening imaginatively, and everybody creates it differently in their head. That's why I think that when people go see movies after they've read the book, they always say the book was better. Well, of course it was, because it was exactly the way you pictured it in your head, right? And in the movie, it's an interpretation through someone else's eyes and their optics on things, and it's limiting. There are no words to accompany it, so they inject music and tension and and all sorts of other things to get you to emote in that way, where you're feeling a connection with those characters. But it's never as good as the book, because the book is exactly how you conjured it in your head, and they're doing that from scratch using my interpretations to put together a game or a graphic novel. And so you coach them as best you can. But like I said, as long as you get in the ballpark, that's going to be good enough for me. I don't want to tell them what they need, because they know what those limitations are. And, so I'm a willing, collaborative when it comes to those kind of things. And I try to stay out of their way.
Yeah, that's cool. It sounds like you've got such an exciting future and a whole bunch of things lined up. So thank you for sharing a little bit of that with me today.
Been my pleasure, and thank you very much for having me on. I enjoyed. I mean, look, I do a number of these things, and some of the stuff we talked about tonight I haven't talked about before. So you asked some very cool questions, and I appreciate that.
Oh no, look, it's such a good news story. I love when people just find an in and follow their passions. And so I really appreciate you sharing with me and my listeners today. And I also want to thank everyone who has tuned in to Creativity Uncovered today, because I really hope that JV's story has inspired you to sort of chase your dreams, and because they don't have to remain just a fantasy. Oh, little pun there for you.
Ooh, that's 2 for you tonight. That's really good.
I can't help myself. I got to end the recording before now. So thanks everyone, and as always, I really hope that this episode helps you some new creativity the next time that you need it. If you've made it this far, a huge thank you for your support and tuning into today's episode. Creativity Uncovered has been lovingly recorded on the land of the Cubby Cubby people, and we pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This podcast has been produced by my amazing team here at Crisp Communications, and the music you just heard was composed by James Gatling. If you liked this episode, please do share it around and help us on our mission to unlock more creativity in this world. You can also hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episode releases.